Hi there, aspiring fiction author. Welcome to Fiction Author Business School. Do you want to write your stories with ease and confidence? Do you find yourself Googling how to write a fiction book or how to write a character arc? Do you want to create a fiction empire, but you can't even finish the story you're currently working on, and you find yourself doubting it will even be good enough? Hi, I'm Liesl. I too have been writing stories since I was just a kid. I wanted to do something about my fiction writing dreams, but got information overload every time I looked for writing help because there's just so much out there on the internet. I wanted confidence that I wouldn't disappoint my readers and a plan to publish regularly. I knew the foundation of any author career, including the marketing aspect, is a stellar and well-written story, but I didn't know how to be sure that my story was solid. I went on a journey to figure out what really makes readers tick and how to incorporate those addictive elements into my story. In this podcast, you'll find specific tactical fiction writing tips, solutions to writing more words more efficiently, and secrets to mastering your author mindset. So put on your fuzzy slippers, grab a notebook and pen and some chocolate, and let's write some fiction. Okay, do you ever feel like your story is not epic enough, not aligned enough, or not emotional enough? When you let people read it, do they just not quite have the emotional reaction you want them to? Or when you're writing it, even if you push through block and indecision, does it sometimes feel like it's just not good enough to you? Like it sounds amateur, or you just feel like you could say it better or tell it better or come up with something better, right? Well, here's the thing, and I honestly think we downplay this a lot in the industry. We always talk about marketing and tactics, but we don't talk enough about story and the problems with story. If you are having any of the problems I just listed while writing your book, the problem you're actually having is with a lack of emotion. Specifically, you aren't creating enough catharsis with your story. Now, I know that a story needs to be emotional to grip your reader. That's like, duh, right? But the reason so many authors don't make many sales, the reason a story might not grip a reader strongly enough or might sound amateur in the writing, is generally because the emotion isn't being brought across well enough. And if you want to be a successful fiction author, meaning widely read, highly paid, fiction author famous, all the things, you need to be intentional and efficient about making sure your reader feels the emotions of your story. One of the most effective ways to do that is by hitting all the levels of emotion that you can in a story. So here's the thing. For most people, if I tell them a scene isn't emotional enough, they'll return to the scene and just, make someone cry or something. Of course, it could also be a sentence structure problem, telling rather than showing, you know the drill. But that's not really what I mean either, okay? So how do you ensure that a reader will really love your book and will come back to your series again and again? Many people will tell you there isn't a formula for doing that. It's all chance. It's all, honing your craft until things just fall into place and the stars just align. Yeah, those people would be wrong. There is a way to ensure that the reader will love your story and will come back to you as an author again and again. And the way to ensure that is to make sure that your reader feels catharsis and satisfaction in your story. So I'm pretty sure everybody knows what catharsis means. It's a pretty common word in the fiction author world, but just in case, let's just make sure that we're all on the same page. What is a catharsis? Catharsis is an intense release of emotions, and generally the reader feels this near the end of the story, near the climactic point. If we're ratcheting up the tension the way that we're supposed to, it comes to a high point, which is the climactic scene of the story, and then the reader feels the emotion of that, and it usually is considered a release of emotions, right? But that is what makes them like the story. That is what makes them feel satisfaction in the story. And how do you define satisfaction? It's just them going, wow, that was a really cool story. That really spoke to me, right? If they don't feel that, then they don't like the story that much. So that's when they start going, nah, it was okay. Because they didn't really feel it, right? So, understanding that means that logically you should be intentionally manufacturing catharsis for your reader. But the question is, how to do that? Well, again, it's not just making a character more emotional in a scene. It's not just adding in a tragedy to your story. Okay, don't get me wrong. Those things can be great if they really serve your story, but they are not what actually manufactures catharsis. So what does? All right, everyone listen up. I'm going to give you the secret that most authors don't know or aren't consciously aware of. What will always manufacture catharsis in your story? What will always give the reader that release of emotions and therefore that satisfaction in the story that will bring them back to you? The answer is change. Really, it's a template, which is part of the human template for storytelling I'm always talking about, where the character fights either for or against something for a long time. And the harder they have to fight, the better. Make them fight like hell. Then everything, what they've been fighting for or against, is going to come to a head. And at that point, we're going to see a change in the character, right? It's your basic story structure. But it's that change that will create catharsis every single time. So you see that it's not really about what you write on the page or how, ticked off your characters are or whatever, right? Because you could have a beautiful description of how a character weeps over the deceased body of a loved one, and it could still be a pretty terrible story, right? It's not about the description. It's not about the emotions the characters are feeling. It's about the overall structure and the way the character changes over time. It's about the dynamics of it, okay? More specifically, if we don't care about that character's loss, if we can't feel their emotions, then we aren't invested and we won't have an emotional reaction. Okay, so if it's not about the emotions the character feels at any given time or the sentences you're putting on the page, then how exactly do we do this? How exactly do we manufacture the catharsis through story? Well, there are lots of ways, and I'm going to be teaching most of them in my new program, 6-Figure Stories. But today, I'm just going to give you the number one thing you need to keep in mind if you want to manufacture catharsis in your stories. Here it is. Ready? You need to intentionally hit all 3 levels of character emotion. What? Did you even know that there are 3 levels of emotion that need to be hit? Probably not. Most authors hit 1, if that. The more skilled authors hit 2, and some might dabble in the 3rd, but very few authors hit all 3, and even fewer are doing it intentionally. Okay, so what are these 3 levels? We're going to start with the superficial level. Yes, I did just say superficial. There is a superficial emotional level, which sounds a little like an oxymoron, but I promise it's not. First of all, let me just put it out there. I don't mean superficial in a bad way. Okay, superficial in our world, it kind of has a connotation for something like fake, and I don't mean that at all. I just mean the first surface level, okay? Nothing negative about this. So your superficial emotions are childlike emotions. They're drama emotions, and they're emotions due to physical sensations. Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. Childlike meaning, a 5-year-old, their toy gets taken away, and it is the worst thing in the world, and they cry, and sometimes we call those crocodile tears, right? So it's just very surface childlike emotions, not terribly mature emotions, right? By drama emotions, I mean teenager drama, I mean soap opera drama, just things that, again, are not terribly deep or perhaps terribly mature, but they are still emotions, and they sort of appeal to our, I don't know how to say it other than our least mature side, but I don't even mean that in a negative way, just the opposite of being a super mature adult human being. You know what I mean? It's just part of growing and part of, our experience as human beings. And even as more mature adults, we still have these emotions, right? We're talking about when we get involved in maybe family drama or gossip or guilty pleasures of watching soap operas or reading trashy novels, what people call trashy novels. All of that is superficial emotion. And again, nothing wrong with it. Just understand and identify that level of emotion, and you do need to be hitting that in your stories in various ways, okay? And then there's the emotions that come from physical sensation. So this is going to be things like adrenaline, sex, and pain, I think, are the main ones. Now, we all talk about how I think we talk about it most often with sex, that sex is an emotion. But anything that is a very powerful physical sensation does cause emotions, and it is rooted in deeper emotion, but we feel it very superficially in the same way that we feel physical pain versus, emotional or psychological pain. And yes, believe it or not, pain, even very small pain, like a child falls and skins his knee, what does he do? He cries, right? So it does cause emotion. But again, it's the surface level of emotions. The second level of emotion is the intellectual or psychological. Now, this is going to have more to do with the character journey and the plot, okay? These are thoughts, things that are more conscious and middling emotions. So when I was just talking about how you need to be dynamic, you need to show the character change, there are emotions that come from there, right? they're more the emotions that, in terms of your book, they're more the emotions that your character is feeling at any given time during the story, okay? They're not necessarily superficial, but they're also not the deepest, most soul-felt emotions. They're just day-to-day, what different choices, what they're thinking about, things like that, okay? So those are the middling emotions, and that's where you're going to need to pay more attention to bringing out the emotion of the scene and, what you're writing on the page to make sure the reader is understanding and experiencing that emotion. Those are kind of it's probably the emotions most people think about when I say you need to make your scene more emotional, right? Then we have number 3, and these are the deep spiritual emotions. These are the deepest emotions, okay? So these are things like heartache and heartbreak. On the more positive side, it's things like when you look down at your child and you just can't describe how much you love them, and you say, I just met this little person, they were just born and I already know I would die for them. Those are really deep, powerful emotions that come from the soul and from the spirit. Okay, so that's the 3rd level of emotion. So you see there's the superficial emotions, which are childlike drama. Okay, so let's recap. We have number 1, the superficial emotions, which are the childlike, drama-rooted, and physical sensations. Then we have number 2, the intellectual or psychological emotions, which has to do with the character journey, the way the character changes, the way the story is dynamic, the middling, everyday emotions, that sort of thing. And then the 3rd level, the deepest one, has to do with the deep spiritual emotions, okay? Things that come from the soul and come from the spirit. So now that you understand this, the next question I'm sure you have is, how do I intentionally hit all of these emotions in my story, thereby causing catharsis and making my reader into a superfan? Unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit beyond the scope of this podcast to teach you that. Each one of these has multiple steps, and it's going to take a little bit of time to figure out how to hit them in your story. But here's the thing. My new program, 6-Figure Stories, basically it has 3 pillars. And if you've listened to me long enough, you've probably heard the names of some of them, okay? The 3 pillars are the Divine Genius, the Human Template for Storytelling, and Secret Reader Triggers. And these 3 pillars actually line up with those 3 levels of emotion that I've been talking about. If you can approach your story from those 3 levels and make sure to hit all 3 of them, you will have the best written story you could possibly have, and you will be light years ahead of most people who are publishing right now and uploading to Amazon, okay? The Divine Genius method, the first one, helps you figure out the invisible elements of your story. In other words, the deeper, more spiritual emotions. This applies to theme, character change, character wound and backstory, and pretty much the entire internal character arc, okay? The second pillar you may have heard me call the Human Template for Storytelling, and it's all about transformational human psychology. So it will help you harness the framework of the journey every human being takes on Earth. And it's something that the reader is already very familiar with because they live it themselves every single day. So you see why that would correspond to more of the intellectual and psychological emotions, right? And finally, there's the secret reader triggers, and they are about the superficial emotions. You're going to use those to get the reader's attention, to keep their attention and pull them through the book, which is just another way of saying that secret reader triggers are what we use to intentionally create a page-turning story, okay? Very possible to do, not even very hard to do, but you have to make sure that you're actively doing it and that you know how. And incidentally, we will also use those same secret reader triggers to market the book, and it will make it very highly marketable. It'll make your marketing so easy if you know how to do that, okay? And I'm going to give you one other tip before we wrap up, and this is something that is not going to be shocking for anyone who's been listening to me for a while. What do I always say you have to plan first? The internal, right? I really get up on my soapbox about that because so few people plan. I mean, there's people who don't plan the internal at all. And most stories will probably have at least one internal component, but it's not being done intentionally, right? And my argument is that not only does it need to be done intentionally, you need to plan that first, and it needs to be the foundation of your story. And most people do it backwards, and then they can't understand why they're not getting very many sales, but it leads to an unemotional, uncathartic, and unfocused story if you do it that way, okay? So that's why. So anyway, as I was saying, you always have to plan the internal and spiritual elements first. Otherwise, your story is like a house with no frame. It's going to cave in. So my final tip to you is to make sure that you plan these in the right order. The 3 levels of emotion. Start with the internal, then move on to the dynamic or psychological, and then put on the superficial last, okay? And that's hard to do Honestly, if you're pantsing your story 100%, you need to have at least a little bit of a plan before you dive in. Otherwise, it's really, really hard to hit all those levels of emotion because you're just not focused on doing it intentionally, all right? But if you do that, you will have an addictive, page-turning, easily and highly marketable six-figure story on your hands. And without that, it's going to be really hard for you to succeed as a fiction writer today with all the competition, because most people are writing generic, unfocused stories and uploading them to Amazon. And so if that's all you're writing too, you're just going to be one of the masses. But if you really want to succeed, you need to up-level your storytelling. And this is the thing that we're not really talking about that much in the space. We talk a lot about marketing. We talk about things like hashtags and keywords and visibility and, running ads and email lists and all of those things. And none of those are bad things. They're all part of your marketing, but they are just the strategy. Real effective book marketing comes at the story level, and you should already know exactly how to market your book by the time you're done writing your story. If you don't have that, it's going to be really, really hard for you to market your book, and therefore it's going to be really hard for you to get sales and be very, very successful, okay? If you would like more help with this, if you want to learn more about how to hit each of these levels of emotion, what I'm going to tell you to do is to join my Facebook group, okay? I'm going to start doing lots of posts and training in there, and that's where you're going to have the most access to me so that I can help you along your fiction writing journey. I would give you the name, but I'm actually about to change the name of the Facebook group, so I'm just going to link it up in the show notes. Just go ahead and hop in there and start, introduce yourself, start interacting with people, and I'm going to actually do a special, like my first live stream that I've done in there in a couple of years, next week on Wednesday. So I will put, I don't think I have it up yet, but I will put a post in there that has the date in the next couple of days. So if you want to be part of that, I would highly recommend you join the Facebook group. And just remember, guys, writing cathartic stories makes readers more empathic, more compassionate, and more resourceful, which is just a fancy way of saying that reading makes you both kinder and smarter. So by writing really cathartic stories for our readers, we can up-level humanity. And that, my friends, is how little old novelists like us can actually change the world. All right? Have a wonderful week of writing, and I will see you in the Facebook group. Until next week. Bye, guys. Thanks so much for listening today. Before you go, would you be willing to do me a solid? If you found any value at all in this episode today, would you be willing to share it with other authors just like you in the hopes that they might find some value in it as well? Happy story crafting this week. Remember, only you can bring the world the unique story that you are trying to tell. Only you can succeed in your own unique way in getting it out of your mind and your heart and into a medium where it can reach thousands, if not millions, of salivating readers. You don't have to worry about failure because there is always a market for awesome.